What up, what up, what up? This is Coach Josh Graves, and I am excited to be your podcast host today. Welcome to the Fitness on Fire podcast. We changed up the game a little bit today, and instead of Coach Vanessa Panella being our podcast host, we have her on today to be our podcast guest. So thanks for coming, Vanessa.
Yeah, this is definitely a change up. Seeing me on this side of the table.
For sure. But you're going to do great, and we have so much to learn from you. I'm excited to interview with you today, and we're going to talk ultra racing, ultra competition, ultra marathon, Spartan ultra, and all things endurance sports of sorts. So excited to have Vanessa on as an ultra competitor, a recent podium finisher, had an incredible race at San Luis Obispo I can't wait to talk about. And then Vanessa's also our ultra coach at Fitness on Fire, so she works with athletes that are also having ambitions of doing great things like these kind of ultra races. So I think we're going to learn a lot from you today, Vanessa.
Yeah, I hope so. Hope I have something to teach.
For sure. For those of you that don't know, an ultra marathon is an endurance race that is longer than a marathon distance. And I think there's varying types of ultra competitions from 50Ks, 50 milers, 100Ks, 100 milers, and probably a mix of other stuff in between there. But big distance races, normally done in trail races for the most part.
Typically trail. That's traditionally how it's done, yeah.
Super cool. And then the Spartan Ultra is a whole different monster, and we'll go into that today a little bit too. Vanessa just got back from San Luis Obispo and crushed it out there at her ultra race there, taking second place in her age group. First podium finish?
That was my first podium finish, yeah.
Yeah, super exciting. And I think that also qualifies you for the Spartan Ultra World Championship next year in Chamonix, France. Is that correct?
Morzine, I misquote it all the time too.
Morzine. I think it's like Chamonix, though. I think it's like Chamonix.
It's a lot like Chamonix. Chamonix is where UTMB is, and it is about a stone's throw away. So I will be visiting when I go. But Morzine, France, I keep accidentally saying the wrong one too. So.
Well, I went to Europe in 2019, and one of my goals was to run in the Swiss Alps a little bit, French Alps a little bit. And we were looking for Chamonix, and for whatever reason, struggled to find it. And we were on a little bit of a time frame, so we drove past Chamonix, ended up in like the mountains, like the French Alps in like Passy or something like that, I think was the town. Got a quick spot over there, stayed the night, woke up the next morning, hit the trails, did some mountain running, and then on the way out, because we had to drive back out of France into Switzerland to hit a train, on the way out, we ended up passing Chamonix, and so we decided to stop off there for breakfast, and at least I got to go and see it. It was like if REI or like Patagonia or something like that had like a town or a baby, that's what like Chamonix was. It was the coolest place. Everybody was in their trail running gear with all their cool stuff, so I'm super jealous. I really want to hear about your trip if you end up going next year.
Yeah, I do plan on going next year. So yeah, I know that Spartan actually changed the race format. Usually the UWC race, the Ultra World Championship race, has always traditionally been a 24-hour race. Next year, it's going to actually be the traditional 50K distance. Oh, okay. Yeah, and I think that decision was made because Spartan acquired Tough Mudder. So their world's toughest mudder is their 24-hour race format, basically. That makes sense. Yeah, they changed it up. I'm unsure of how I feel about it because I like 24-hour race format. They're fun. They're very challenging. I love a good 24-hour race format. And you can make a 24-hour race kind of like as difficult or as not challenging as you need it to be. Like it's different, hard, basically. But doing 50K distance does give me a very specific thing to get ready for. So that is nice.
Super cool. Yeah. Well, I wish you the very best there. And then again, just glad to have you on this side of the mic. So just check in with us. How you feeling today?
I feel great. I feel honestly awesome. I'm in off season technically, and it's almost Thanksgiving, so it's kind of a nice time to be in the off season. Sure. Yeah, so we're back to like baseline strength work, and just even my long runs aren't that long right now. On the build to Ultra World Championships in July, so off season feels really nice, especially coming off a win. So. Yeah,
that's perfect. It's a great way to kind of finish the season, yeah?
Yes, it was.
And congrats on an incredible performance. I'm unbelievably proud of you. I've told you this a couple times, but if I will like look you in the eyes right now and tell you how proud I am of you.
Yes, I appreciate it.
And I think I've been around you a little bit behind the scenes to see some of the roller coaster you've been on this year with your health and fitness, seeing maybe a couple setbacks along the way. Yeah. Would you kind of maybe give us some insight to what this year was like for you, training for some events, maybe having an injury, how you overcame that, and then had a massive comeback?
Yeah, so I actually started the year, I was actually looking back at my bullet journal where I always list like the best and worst of like each month, and I do this for the subsequent weeks too. So I was looking back, it's one of the values in like actually doing something like that is I look back and I was like, oh man, like I started January with a hip labral tear, which was for me the most devastating injury since my L4, L5 disc herniation back when I was in the Navy. It was new because normally like my back will flare up because that disc herniation doesn't go away. So I live in chronic pain in varying degrees at that point. The hip issue was very new. I did not know how to recover from that. So roller coaster, to your point, it was a roller coaster, just like figuring out what it was, because I utilized the VA. So it was a really long time just to figure out what was wrong. By the time I got to the fact that it was a hip labral tear, I was just grateful it wasn't that big of a tear. It was small, it was low grade, so I didn't need surgery. That was good, but then it was about 6 months of not running at all, or maybe even a little bit more, because it had bled from the year prior, so last year. But I did recovery, I did ultra red light therapy, I did all my PT the way I was supposed to, I took the time off I was supposed to. Once I felt like I was ready to start running again, I felt like I was brand new, felt like my body was brand new. I didn't really know how to handle it, so I got a coach and slowly built myself up to San Luis Obispo. And all I wanted was to just be back, and to have a podium finish and PR from the same course was not, like, I wanted it, I wanted that, of course I wanted that, but just being back on the race course and like finishing a 50K Spartan Ultra, just being out and competing again was kind of my goal. So to supersede that was far and beyond what I actually expected from this year. My recovery was quick because I feel like I did everything right. So it felt like the plan kind of like came together. This long-term thing of like I hadn't raced in a year. To take the recovery and build back in over the course of a year, it's just like Ultra, it just requires patience.
Tell me about the patience. I mean, it's easy to look back when you're not injured anymore to be like, yeah, I did all the recovery stuff. I executed the plan and I did the work and I got back on my feet. But I know, because I've been injured as an athlete, that there are a lot of dark days when you're going through an injury or you're trying to come back from something like that. Could you share with us maybe a little bit of the mental component of like how you overcame this injury to get yourself back on your feet? Because it could be easy enough to say, oh man, like, I don't think I'll ever get back into running. I don't think I'll ever be an ultra athlete again. I don't think my hips will ever heal. Like, there's so many places that I go when I've been injured. I don't know if you shared some of those, but how does somebody get through something like that and get back on their feet?
I mean, it's certainly not easy. I'm not going to say there weren't like bad, dark days. You just will have days like that. You will have days that you're like, man, am I even an athlete? Do I even want to run anymore? Do I even do this ultra thing anymore? Like, do I need to change my sport and all this other jazz? I definitely did that. I had a bit of an identity crisis, and I think anyone that's been injured or had to come away from their sport for a little while has had that identity crisis. I mean, I go to therapy on a regular basis, so it turned into what my therapy sessions were about, which was this identity crisis and what to do. I went back to the book Training Camp, actually. That's one of my favorite books to go back to whenever I'm injured or hurting or feeling like I can't do anything, because the book is literally about a football player that's injured. That's like his whole future is riding on not being injured because he's in the draft, right?
He's in the preseason, yeah.
Preseason draft, yeah. So his whole future, like, he's doing this for like his mom and his girlfriend, and like all these things, all this weight's on his shoulders, and like while he's injured, he's learning how to be better mentally. So actually, I go back to that book whenever I'm injured, because it's not so much a feel good, because it wasn't about him, like, it's kind of about rolling with the punches. People that are great at what they do or make progress in what they do certain things, right? They are strong mentally when it is the hardest part. And I don't think I could be an ultra athlete without that sort of patience. But just like in an ultra race, like when things go wrong, you need to move past things fast. Otherwise you don't get to finish or get to the goal. Right. So it's weird. It's a bit of a catch-22, because like what I learned from ultra running helps me in life. And then I have to do the same thing when I run or race. Like, you don't always get to accomplish things. Like getting into this podium finish, I had actually qualified for Worlds last year, and that race got canceled due to the fires in Tahoe. So I was like, man, I did all this work and I don't even get my shot.
That happened to you too in 2020, right? You were getting ready for San Luis Obispo the first time for an ultra. I remember you training. Was that one of the first ones that you were training for at the time?
I had my first Spartan Ultra was at the end of 2019.
Okay.
And that was, I did an age group and I had a top 5 finish in that race.
Nice.
I actually went straight into elite. I kind of skipped a step. There was plenty of races where I would have podiumed my age group, but I was running in the elite category, so I couldn't expect a podium finish, not without a lot of work. So I went into this whole endeavor understanding that it was going to be a multi-year endeavor. And I think that's part of like, oh, I want to do an ultra. It's like, expect it to take a while. Or it's the race or the amount of time you spend training. If you want to be good at it, it definitely takes time and focus. Is really what it is. Yeah.
Well, I can dig it. Well, take us to San Luis Obispo a little bit. Tell us about the race. I mean, if you've raced at all, then you probably know there's always tell us the story of the race. Like, what were some of the highlights? What were maybe some of the ups and downs of the race? Tell me a little bit about it.
Slow is probably one of my favorite courses. That's why I keep going back. Like, it's hilly, but it's not the mountains. So it's a bit undulating in its nature, but it's got some steep descents. And there was one hill, and I know everybody that ran the Beast had to go down this same hill where everyone was just sliding on their butts. Like, everybody was just like, look looking like Pigpen from Peanuts, like coming out of there. Like there was like a pile of people just like dumping dirt out of their shoe because it's, you know, it's worth it to dump the dirt out of your shoe, I promise. Otherwise, it's just uncomfortable, especially when you're doing a race for like 10 hours. It's funny. Ultras are funny because the type of people you meet are different, even though there's a lot of people running the Beast that day or whatever other race is going on that day. It's usually a Beast. The people who are running the Ultra are just acting different. They are probably the ones having the most fun, which is kind of, I think people would think that that's weird. Like, what do you mean they're having the most fun? They're in the most pain. And it's like, yeah, you have a lot of this like shared suffering that's happening. So when you see somebody else with like the Ultra penny on, like you're already friends. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's kind of like someone walked in and had your favorite sports team jersey on. Like you got something to talk about.
Sure.
Especially when you're out there on the course. Yeah, especially when you're out there on the course. Like if you're going the same pace for at least a little bit, you know, talk about how your race is going. And then when somebody wants to pick up the pace and it's like, cool, see you later. It's such a flash in the pan relationship that's very interesting. Like it's okay that they go faster and it's like, okay, bye. Like, and no one takes it personally. No one's like out there like trying to race each other. Like we all want to do well, but at the same time, it's a different racing environment because if you're next to each other, you're talking to each other, which I don't think happens in most other races. You're competing against each other and you don't really talk until after the race is done.
I have to assume that you're not racing each other at that point, probably. And I say I assume because I've never done an ultra. And I joked with you before we jumped on the podcast. And I'm not sure you're going to talk me into it today, but we'll see. We'll see. But I assume that it's more you versus you than it is you versus the people around you, because there's so many things that can go wrong in a 10-hour race. I think really just trying to keep yourself from blowing up or bonking or making sure your nutrition's right or making sure your gear's right or your transitions go smooth. I mean, there's so many things to think about there that it's beating you to the top of that hill in mile 2 of a 50-mile race probably doesn't matter at all.
Exactly. We all know that there's a lot of race to race, no matter where we're at. So that's why you can't be just sitting there trying to like just be faster than the person next to you the whole time. You will blow up or you'll blow each other up. It's much more productive to run your race. That's the only way you can do it. If you're really concerned by, man, even if you're doing you versus you, I was going to talk about this a little bit later when I get into like how to goal set. At that point, when you're at the race, whatever your training was is going to be there for you. You really can't be concerned about your split times. There's too many things that can go wrong, because if you're aiming for this really specific split time and you're not getting it, that'll wreck you for the next like 5 or 6 hours. But that is a weird mental game to play with yourself that I don't suggest people do. Your fitness will be there for you. When things go wrong, they go wrong. It's going to mess with your split time. You keep moving forward. It's an interesting dynamic.
Love it. I think when a lot of people talk ultra, they're talking trail races for the most part, or like ultra marathons. So what's the difference, if we're not familiar, what's the difference between doing like a Spartan ultra and like an actual ultra marathon?
Ultra marathons can and are very much longer than Spartan. 50K is the shortest distance ultra in the ultra world. So a lot of people like laugh at me. They're like, oh yeah, it's only a 50K. And it's, well, the people I hang out with, yeah, it kind of is. I hang out with people that run 100-mile races. Like a 50K or 32-ish miles is nothing to them. So it's interesting. The fact that the Spartan race has obstacles is something that someone who might do a 100-mile race like won't even touch because they're not interested in it. So it's very different in that aspect. One key difference that I always thought was like kind of interesting and funny, because back to, I think Spartan Ultras, that 50K distance is more difficult than a regular 50K in some aspects, but the aid stations, like when you go run a trail 50K, their aid stations are like the lap of luxury compared to the way Spartan aid stations run, because Spartan aid stations are just basically there for like the beasters, the half marathoners. So it's pretty much just water. When you go to any other ultra that's in a trail, like even if it's just a 50K or a 12-hour race or even the fun runs, their aid stations are like hot soup, actual food, I guess I could say, and it's like a smorgasbord. There's so many different options at these aid stations that I highly recommend like people making sure that they are self-sustained with the things that they're used to training with and all that other stuff. But like to understand that your aid station is going to have like peanut butter and jelly, ginger ale, those kind of things.
So I think I've heard ultra marathons referred to as competitive eating contests with running.
It's very accurate. Yeah. So yeah, regular ultras have objectively better aid stations. It's not saying Spartan doesn't like do what they need to. It's just their aid stations are built for the half marathoners, not the ultra runners that day.
Might be lucky if you get a cliff block or something.
Like not even, dude, not even. But even like regular 50Ks, I've had like even the worst aid stations still had like pretty legit food, like peanut butter and jelly cut up in squares, potato chips, like all the different options you could possibly want. And that was probably my least favorite ultra. Still had really good aid stations. That's kind of a weird difference, but it's very notable as far as I'm concerned. And then of course Spartan has the obstacles. It's somewhat usually around 60 obstacles, something like that. And then penalties if you can't do those obstacles. Whether that's the penalty loop or burpees. And then I was doing Spartan Ultras before they did the penalty loops almost at all. So I was like, a good day at a Spartan Ultra was like less than 100 burpees.
I think I heard that the penalty loops at slow were pretty gnarly.
They were usually uphills. I personally thought they were pretty manageable.
Okay.
They weren't that bad. I guess it depends on how well your running game is. If you're going to do a Spartan Ultra and you're coming from just doing Spartan races, the running's the star of the show. It just is. You need to be good at running in a Spartan Ultra. And if you're coming from the ultra sector and you're trying to do obstacles, you've got your running background. But I do notice that a lot of those types of athletes they have very little, if not no, strength training. So their grip work needs like a lot of work. So it's just the pendulum swings whichever way, depending on where you're coming from.
Well, let's segue into nutrition. We're starting to talk about food a little bit. So somebody's training for an ultra, like what are maybe a couple things they should know about nutrition or how to fuel for something like this?
Eat real food as much as you possibly can. My only exception is maybe like my super long run days, like when I'm getting up to like 3 or 4 hour long runs on weekends. Then I'm practicing with, like you mentioned, Cliff Blocks earlier. Blocks, Stinger waffles, kind of my favorite right now. You want to practice with what you're going to use. Real food is great until you don't want to eat it. And if you're in a place where you're not eating, whether it's in your long run or your actual ultra, you're in a bad place. That training session, you're probably not going to finish that race.
When you say real food, you're not necessarily saying like chicken, apples. You're saying food that like you would typically eat, opposed to like blocks, goos, gels, those kind of things. Like maybe like a peanut butter and jelly, for example.
Yeah.
In our health, whole foods nutrition conversation, would it maybe be considered a real food? But am I right in understanding what you're saying here is like food that you would typically eat in a meal, just not relying completely on goos, gels, Cliff Blocks, things like that.
That's the idea. Yeah. And then like that's regular day to day. I want to try and eat real food. And then on my super long runs, that's when I practice with like the waffles. I keep wanting to call them wafers.
They're basically wafers.
They kind of are wafers. Troop waffles, blocks, liquid nutrition is actually really huge if you're talking about ease of like digestion and stuff like that. I think one thing people don't think about very much, whether it's your long run or your race, is you actually should be getting some sort of whole nutrition because you're going to be eating some sort of nutrition in your stomach that requires digestion within the first 30 minutes. So one of the interesting things about nutrition during an ultra, whether it's your ultra race or your like super long run or your long runs on weekends or whatever it is, eating in the first 30 minutes. It sounds kind of like silly, like, oh, so I'm only 30 minutes into my run or my race. Like, why would I need to eat? Like, I know a lot of ultra runners out there, like, I don't eat until like an hour and a half or when I get hungry or whatever. The issue with that is that there's no blood going to your stomach. It's a bit of a weird thing. Like, we want blood going to our extremities to do the work, and it will do that if you're doing the work. But that's what the first 30 minutes is for, is basically you're telling your body that there needs to be some sort of allotment of blood going to the gut. Otherwise, if you wait until like 2 hours into your race, that's when you can possibly get like stomach upset and stuff like that. So that's one of those like words to the wise, is actually that first 30 minutes is actually crucial to like start eating. And it's one of the things that actually like kept me focused during this last ultra in San Luis Obispo. Was I was just looking forward to every 30 minutes I was putting food in my mouth. About half a waffle every half an hour, somewhere around that, like 50 calories every 30 minutes or 100 calories per hour-ish, maybe a little bit more.
I mean, this gets my mind working on a lot of things, so I'll try to stay on topic, but it goes to like preparation for me. So I know that you have like a bucket that you bring with you for the ultras. What's in the bucket?
It's the transition bucket. It's interesting because I'll change it from like having the bucket to doing a cooler, or I've kind of ended up actually doing a cooler as opposed to a bucket. So I'll put an ice pack in there to make sure that like my food stays like cool, so it doesn't like melt in the sun, because it's kind of just sitting out there for, however long I'm out there. That being said, so food, first and foremost, I've got food refills for my pack, water refill for my pack, some sort of first aid just in case. So like moleskin for blisters, stuff like that. Something with clothes. It's always socks, and then I kind of decide game day, like what else is in there. I like having more than I need in the transition area. A lot of times I am just refilling what I ate during the actual first loop of the ultra.
It's kind of like pack light while you're out there, right?
Yeah.
And then eat a little bit of what you take, but you don't want to Sherpa all the stuff with the race with you, so that's where the transition area is nice, right?
Yes, it's a little bit more than halfway, actually, so that actually is kind of nice. And back to like everything, gratitude's probably the biggest one, because when I get to transition, I'm actually closer to 18 miles into this 32-mile race. I'm more than halfway done. So every time I go out, I'm just like, it's shorter than loop one. Like, it's already less. We're almost done. If you can go out thinking this is shorter than what I just did and be grateful for that, it's a huge mood lifter. It's a huge mood lifter to think of it like that. And it works every time for me. Be like, second loop, it's shorter than the first one. Let's go.
I've seen some the ultra athletes, specifically in like ultra marathons and some of these really like some of these super duper fast ultra racers. But when they come into the transition, they have like a crew. It almost looks like a pit stop, right? Where it's like they have a crew maybe taking their shoes off while they're stuffing down some food, and they're putting water on them or putting more sunscreen on them and they're getting the gear on, they're eating as they get up and they pack. How do you make the most out of the transition? Did you have like a crew helping you? Is that what it's like behind the scenes?
In the 50K race, you are actually not allowed a crew and you're not allowed a pacer. So that's another big difference. The 24-hour race, you were allowed a crew. You were allowed a crew as big as you wanted actually for the 24-hour the old 24-hour format. They just had to be checked in basically. It made more sense for the 24-hour format, but for the 50K, you're not allowed a crew or a pacer. So no help for at least the competitive waves. I have people come like visit me and say hi. That's about it. Otherwise, I probably look like a toddler throwing a tantrum with taking off my shoes. I think I threw one of my shoes when I was trying to take my shoes off. If you've never done it before, like your fine motor skills start to go away. So like something as simple as untying my shoes became a very tedious task. So for other ultras where you're allowed a crew at certain points and the race rules will dictate like where you're allowed to have help. That actually, when you talk about these ultras where people are taking off your shoes for you, that's actually pretty necessary. That's not about like speed of getting in and out of the transition. Like it's super, it is.
Those shoes aren't coming off otherwise.
It's necessary. It's definitely something that is extraordinarily helpful. And I've done different ultras where I have had a crew and I have had that help, and it's a game changer to have someone just doing something as simple as untying your shoes for you. Even if you don't take your shoes off, sometimes untying them to allow them to breathe a little bit also helps. But crews for a race are crucial, and I've crewed for more races than I've had a crew just to stay involved. I try not to race more than like 3, maybe 4 races a year, but to go to more races and be in the community more. Crewing for a race, I think, is actually a really cool thing to do. And there are people that need crews. There's companies that like actually sell their time for crewing. But if you're in the community enough, it's like you meet somebody on the trail. Like I just said, you meet people on the trail. Like maybe you make friends, maybe you connect on Instagram and they're like, oh, I'm doing this race, but I don't have a crew yet. It's like, I'll crew for you. You're just making connections with strangers at that point. So it's a cool way to make friends.
Super cool. Yeah, I mean, it's all a new world for me. I've done quite a few races. I've done triple-digit Spartan races in my lifetime, but I've yet to dabble into the ultra distance. And I think I'm not alone. I think there's a lot of people that maybe stick on the Spartan sprint super beast or more in your half marathons, marathon distance races. So walk me through maybe some of the mental shift that happens between doing like a longer endurance race like this and maybe a shorter type of race like I'm talking about.
Like bridging the gap between the two? I think anyone can do it. Personally, I think that multi-loop, because in Spartan Ultra you have 2 loops, and I referenced it earlier. Your first loop is somewhere around that 18-mile mark, and then the rest of that 32-mile distance, so 14 miles, is finished in that second loop. You do the beast loop one more time. So it's 2 loops. I think that transition area, and I harp on transition area so much, because if you get to transition and you sit down and you kick your feet up for an hour thinking you got plenty of time, like you're probably not finishing that race.
Object in motion stays in motion.
Basically,
right? Just get your butt back out there.
I try to spend no more than 10 minutes in transition. At the very most, and that's because I'm changing my shoes and my socks. Usually that's what takes up a bulk of the time. Back to like I can't really like untie my shoes.
And next time we're gonna have to get a video you trying to untie your shoes. It sounds like
I might have one. Yeah,
it sounds like a thing.
Yeah, I might have one. It's the hardest part. I'm just like it's like not working. I'm just like, why are my hands working? It definitely becomes the hardest part, but I digress. The bridging the gap, I think anyone can do it. I've done a lot of these. I still have a coach. Having a coach just be able to make it less scary for you, because it is an unknown thing. It's not even the race that's scary. It's the unknown of what's going to happen. So being accepting of the unknown is like the only thing I could probably tell people is like, things are going to go wrong and that's okay. Move past it. It's not as long as you think it is. It's really not. Like when you're out there doing it, it doesn't feel like 10 and a half hours. People can't conceptualize 10 and a half hours of like being time on feet, right? Anytime I tell people, they're like, oh, how long was your ultra? I was like, 10 and a half hours or in some change or whatever, or 11 hours or 12 hours or whatever it was. And they're like, whew, that's a long time. I'm like, yeah, it is. But I don't start my race thinking, oh God, here goes 10 hours. You have to do it in chunks. You really have to take it in these little my 30-minute bite-sized pieces. Literally, I was taking a bite of things every 30 minutes. Finding those small little chunks to look forward to and not being so concerned with this is the longest thing or the hardest thing I've ever done. That's part of the mental prep, is you can't be concerned with the mileage or how long it's taking. You need to be like, oh, it's been 30 minutes. I need to put food in my mouth. And be concerned with where you are in the moment. It's the most present you will ever be in your, that's why I think a lot of people people, ultramarathoners, consider it like a spiritual experience because it's the most present you could possibly be. It's the most present I ever am in my entire life, like ever. It's the most in my skin that I ever am is when I'm doing an ultra race specifically. My runs can get like that too, but racing especially is like, because it's systematic. It's like, okay, it's been 30 minutes, I'm eating. And I'm not so concerned with like how much longer I have to go. You can't do that. You have to be where your feet are at all times. So that's the freeing part of it. As far as I'm concerned, is that my expectations are just kind of like out the door. My expectations are for training. And my expectations are not low, but I'm just not so concerned with it. There's no more fitness I could possibly get right before the race starts. You just have to like, okay, I did the work. So all of the work leading up to the ultra is where the magic happens.
I like that a lot. I had a kind of similar experience, if you will. I did something called the Project in 2022, and it was like a 75-hour crucible for men where you show up in a white t-shirt and black shorts, and that's pretty much all you're allowed to bring, and then you're just at their mercy for 75 hours. They tell you when to sleep, when to eat, if you sleep or if you eat, and then it's just like physical punishment for 75 hours. As I talk about it or I share it with people, people are like, gosh, it's got to be so awful, like that has to be so long. But when you're in it, there was actually something, I think you said it, like freeing about like really kind of turning my brain off from the rest of the stresses in my life essentially, and really just focusing on surviving for the next the next challenge that's presented to me. It's just like, what's the next thing? Okay, cool, I'll do it. What's the next thing? Next step, keep moving forward, don't stop. Like so I think there is something uniquely spiritual about having to do the work and just getting through the grit of it.
And doing it for the sake of doing it. And I think we've heard a lot of ultra athletes, so like whatever it looks like for anybody, the Iditarod people that are doing that, that's crazy. I just got goosebumps thinking about it. I think that's such a cool thing. But this idea of flow state, doing something for the sake of doing it. And I read Flow, and I listened to some of Colin O'Brady. Yeah, some of the Impossible first, like before the ultra, just to remind myself that like in the moment you are doing the activity for the sake of doing the activity. It's no longer about a podium finish like while you're doing the activity. And it makes it so much more enjoyable. Like, oh man, I'm out here. And I think during something like an ultra, like I was reflecting on the year, like, man, I couldn't walk in January. Like I could barely stand up, and it was really painful. And now I'm out here. Any pain is kind of like just pales in comparison. Like the pain went away actually, as far as like the pain in my legs from like actually like doing the race. That's all I can think of is like, I'm out here right now. Like, and I couldn't. So being grateful for what your body can do is huge. That's what it's actually about for me. Like I love doing well and improving, and all of that's fun. But I would not keep doing it. I think I would have been that person like, yeah, I did it, check that off the list, like I'm done, if I didn't have that feeling from doing ultras.
It's funny though too, when you focus on going with the flow and you're a little less outcome focused, the good outcomes happen too.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that with anything, right? When you stop playing to when your focus is less about not losing or something like that, and it's just about playing. Just go play, do your best, have fun, remember why you're here, all that stuff. I think it's so unique and so awesome. Again, congrats on an incredible performance.
Yeah. And I talk about that with my athletes. So you talked about outcomes versus process, having process goals versus having outcome goals. So my process goal was eat every 30 minutes, and it typically lines up with a good outcome, which is, whatever that goal is, finishing, podium, just not cramping, like whatever it is. Having something like a process goal where it's like, I did my processes 100%. And if I didn't end up on the podium that day, it would have been fine, right? The processes we're all like, I did everything right. You can always do everything right and have it still go wrong. I've DNF'd races before. That was something else I kind of wanted to talk about, was the idea of not finishing. Do not finish, DNF. You don't always get to finish every race. And I think I learned the most from DNFs. That's actually a really funny story. I had my time chip cut off by the photographer from Born to Run, Luis Escobar.
Okay.
He goes to cut my time chip off, and I was like, no! And I look up and I was like, I know you. He's like, I know you know who I am. Like, because he was the race director that day. And he actually sat me down and talked to me because I had DNF. I was like, I've never DNF'd a race before. And he's just like, yeah, it's part of the process. It made me more accepting of the moment. But the fact that DNFing is part of the process, you don't always get to finish every race. And if you don't finish a race, that means that you didn't respect the course enough and that the course doesn't owe you anything, which is a cool life lesson. Like,
sure.
Because you can do a lot of hard work and not win, but like, are you going to race again? You know what I mean? So I could have DNF'd and be like, that's it. Like, I guess I'm not good at this. And that seems to be kind of the theme of what we're talking about, which is like, there's probably more failure than success in this endeavor and learning how to roll with it.
Nice. Very good. That's really good insights. I think we can use a lot of that in life and just about anywhere that we face adversity, right? So you said something deep right there too. The course doesn't owe you anything. I was like, oh, yeah, you're damn right. That's you want to come back and get it. So that's fair. I was going to kind of ask why somebody would do something like this. And I think you gave us a lot of compelling reasons for that. So maybe I can ask a different question, which would be like, where would somebody start if they wanted to go from doing an average distance race of some kind and getting into this ultra scene? How do they start? Where do you start?
I usually say sign up for something, but give yourself an ample amount of time.
What's an ample amount of time for something like this?
At least 6 months to a year.
Okay.
If you're really going from like a 5K, you want to go to 5K to 50K, I would give yourself like a year. Because as much as I can say, well, anybody can go out there and like walk 50K, I really do believe that. That's totally true. Should you though, is a bit of a different question. You want to do it safe, but the running takes a toll on you. I say at least 6 months, a year if you really, really want to do like enjoy yourself out there on the course. I always advocate for getting a coach if you're really unsure, just to be able to walk you through some of like the hard stuff. Like just getting to race day can be really scary for people, especially if it's your first time out. There's something about having people there when you raced. Having people there is such a ergogenic aid. It is so uplifting to see your coach, your friends, your significant other, whoever, having a coach that's really invested in your success feels different. You probably get through the race and it's fine, but like it feels different to have someone there that's like, hey, you're okay. It's like, oh yeah, I'm okay. Especially when you're on like that autopilot mode during the race or even during your training runs that are particularly hard. Checking in with someone, be like, and then so my coach would always say like, hey, you got the job done. Like you did the work. Good job. And it's like, even though it didn't feel like I was like doing enough, or maybe I was having like a bad week, just like having that check-in of having somebody say like, hey, you did it. You checked the boxes. Let's go next week. Move on. Helping get those repetitions in. I always recommend getting a coach, but honestly, if we're talking about just trying to get into those longer distances, time on feet. Like if someone needs an action item right now, it's like, yeah, but what do I do, Vanessa? It's time on feet. Time on feet is going to be more important than the distances that you're running. And it's not always as simple as just increasing 10%, allowing your body to actually adapt to that extra time on feet. So wherever you're starting, allow your body to adapt to that for like a couple weeks and then increase it. It's a longer periodization phase. Otherwise you'll hit this cap point where you can't continue to add more time on feet. And I think one mistake that I think a newcomer might make is trying to build up to a 50K distance before their race. And what I mean by that is trying to go do a 30-mile long run before they go run a 30-mile race. Doesn't always work like that. The progressive overload is built there for a reason. This is another reason I would say get a coach, because like I am a coach in ultras and I don't like thinking about it that much for myself. I like just being told what to do. And as a coach, like I can sit there and be like, oh yeah, all this makes sense. But taking kind of that burden of like, what am I supposed to do off my plate is valuable to me.
And having somebody has a proven track record that knows that like I baked this cake before, trust the recipe kind of thing,
yes.
Right? Versus like you could build your own recipe if you want. I can't really tell you how the cake's going to come out, but I hope it's going to be good.
Yeah. Baking's actually a really good metaphor, because like if you give me a recipe and I add a little bit more flour because I felt like it or because that looked right, you're going to get a vastly different cake. It's probably going to be more dry than what you want. So if you want a particular outcome, having a good recipe is important. So I actually do like that metaphor. Yeah.
Nice. Any other advice for somebody that might be new or thinking about doing something like this? I think I've heard a couple stories at Fitness on Fire, at least, where we have some members that are going to be trying their hand at a Spartan Ultra next year. So
what I like is if people want to do a Spartan Ultra, try a regular Ultra. Try a regular 50K. Regular doesn't sound like a great word for some people, I think. It's like, oh, it's a regular. But like a regular trail 50K, the pressure is a little bit lower. The community's great. I know I kind of joked about the 12-hour and 24-hour formats before. But what's great about a 12 or a 24-hour race is you can stop whenever you want. There's nothing that says you have to go the entire 24 hours. Like 24-hour races, like if you're trying to do like 100 miles, like you need to strategize your naps, and that's a whole different story. But if you're a beginner, doing like a 12-hour format and just trying to see how long you can go, and then if you really feel beat up and you feel like you can't do it anymore, you stop. You can stop whenever you want during a 12-hour race. It's a very low pressure environment. If you only do 15 miles, that's the longest you've ever done, and it's a 12-hour race, and you only raced for 2 of those hours, like no one's going to think any less of you. They're going to tell you great job, because that's what they're going to ask. They'll be like, is that the farthest you've ever run? And you're going to be like, well, yeah. And you're going to be like a little hard and stuff. They're like, oh my God, that's great. And you've got this community that's like very excited for you. So I highly recommend doing either like a 12 or a 24-hour format, depending on your your level. I think that's a great intro to just trying to go far in a safe environment that has a really good aid station, so you can kind of experiment with your food a little bit too, but low pressure. So that I think is a great place to start.
Well, Vanessa, this was really cool to kind of get like an inside or like a behind the scenes look at like Spartan ultra racing and kind of your experience with this last race and your experience as a whole. I think you had a lot of value bombs here as we talk about ultra racing. We'll connect all of your information in the show notes and those kind of things, so you can absolutely connect with Coach Vanessa if you're looking to ask more questions or you're looking to maybe hire a coach that could help you with your ultra experience. So thank you so much for your expertise. Thank you for letting me take over the seat as the podcast host today and get a chance to interview you. Any last words for our ultra audience today?
You can do it.
Yeah, love it. You can do it. So if you're thinking about it, please do. And I know that there's a bunch of us going out next year. I think there's about 10 members that I've heard from Fitness on Fire that have talked about doing their first ultra next year.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to celebrate their success also. And then I'm hoping that you get a chance to do World Championship next year if that's in your heart, Vanessa.
Yeah, that is in the plan.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fitness on Fire podcast. If you like today's episode, make sure that you subscribe to the podcast. You don't want to miss out on future episodes and incredible guests like Vanessa that we had on today. If you're interested in supporting the future episodes of Fitness on Fire's podcast, feel free to leave us a donation. You can find the link in the show notes. We appreciate you, the audience, and we'll see you next time.